If you feel like people are constantly interrupting you when you talk and you are sick of that feeling, well, this video is for you. I'm a former Emmy Award winning television journalist and I teach at Columbia University. Knowing how to handle being interrupted is a life skill because once you learn how to do this, you can command the attention of any conversation or any meeting so that your ideas get heard. These are the phrases you can say when someone talks over you. Because how many times have you sat in a meeting where you found the confidence to finally say what's on your mind? And about 30 seconds into you sharing your idea, somebody else talks over you. And worse yet, they took credit for your idea. The really frustrating part about all this is you spent the time preparing. You spent the time to contribute in a meeting, but just like that, the moment was gone. This is probably one of the worst feelings, and I want you to know the way you handle yourself in a situation like this can carry with you wherever you go. So here's the first tip. If someone keeps interrupting you, don't take backing down as you needing to be polite. In my book, Smart Not Loud, I talk about how for many of us who are raised with quiet culture values like being humble and deferential, it may be our instinct to let someone else speak, where we just sit quietly and listen to them. And while there is a lot of value in listening, allowing someone to constantly dominate you and your ideas doesn't allow you to put yourself in the best light. So, this is the first thing I want you to do. Acknowledge what is happening and then redirect the conversation. Try saying this sentence. I hear what you're saying, John, but I want to make sure I finish my thoughts first. Then I'd love to hear yours. Powerful. This sentence is powerful because you're not being rude. You're simply asserting your presence. And by the way, you're not asking for permission to speak, which you don't. You're just stating calmly and clearly that you are not done with your idea. In fact, research from Columbia Business School found that people who call out someone's rudeness in the moment without being aggressive are consistently rated as more confident and higher status than those who just back down or if they escalated the situation. So the key here is if someone interrupts you, don't back down, but acknowledge them and then redirect the conversation. In fact, I remember just last week, I had one of my clients, Priya, who is a product manager at a tech company. She was telling me that she was feeling pretty frustrated at work because she had a very assertive colleague who kept trying to interject whenever she would speak up in meetings. She described this specific moment where she was about 2 sentences into sharing her ideas, but then her colleague just cut right in. This was particularly frustrating for her because as a result, no one heard her. No one even respected her ideas. So we started talking, and then I encouraged her to try this tip, acknowledge and then redirect. She said she tried it in her next meeting, and it completely changed how she carried herself in her meetings. And she told me that what she said was, she told her colleagues, I hear what you're saying, but let me make sure I finish my thought first, then I'd love to hear yours. She told me that just that one sentence, it changed not just her position in the meeting, but it started to change the way people started to perceive her. And she was able to begin to carry herself with more confidence because now she knew what to do. Here's a second point. Intentionally repeat your idea. So if someone cuts you off and the room is now moving on to a different conversation because that's what people assume, if you want to bring it back, bring it back. Because the truth is, if you have more to say because it's important to you, you bring the conversation back to where you want it to go. In fact, doing this deliberately is one of the most underrated moves because when you find yourself in a situation like this, it might start to look like this. You say something, someone else says something, Now someone across the table interrupts, and suddenly the topic has shifted to something else completely different. From there, though, you can still insert your voice in by saying a sentence like this. I want to come back to the point I made earlier because I think this is important that we discuss this further. Once you finish, then people will start to see, oh, what you have to say is not done. It signals that to other people. And you're doing it in a way that's not about being so assertive, but you're just bringing it back to the topic that you want to talk about. And this is actually something we as reporters used to do all the time when the people we were interviewing tried to change the topic. Now, as a former reporter, we needed to make sure a specific topic was addressed during the interview. So I used a sentence just like this. I want to come back to the point that I was making earlier because I think this is important to address. Just a sentence like that. Now, if you're thinking, oh man, this sentence sounds so forward, try saying it out loud a few times. I guarantee when you can say it with fluidity and ease, it actually gives you that presence where people start to respect you and your voice. Here's a third point. When you are saying something and the person next to you interrupts, I want you to use the nonverbal body language cue of looking at them, nodding your head, and then saying the words, hold on a moment, and then continue talking. Here's why this works. This nonverbal cue of nodding is doing something very specific. It signals to the other person that you hear them, that you see them, but you're not dismissing what they have to say. And by the way, that you're not threatened by them or their interruption. In fact, research shows that nonverbal communications like that, it tells us up to 55% of how we perceive a conversation. It comes from our body language, not necessarily our words or our tone, but it's really how we're carrying ourselves in that moment. So now when you pair that calm, steady nod with a direct look and a short, clear phrase, you are now communicating authority without aggression. You're also signaling, I'm in control of this conversation and I'm choosing to stay in it. Now, if you're thinking, can I do this if my boss interrupts me? Well, this is where I say context matters. Of course, it's important to allow your manager to say what they have in mind, but I believe if you have that clarity and that conviction around what you have to say, you can allow them to speak, but be sure to follow up afterwards. That way, they know what you have to say and they know how it contributes to the conversation. In fact, a good manager, they're going to understand this. And by responding in this way of bringing it back to what you want to say, it will signal to them that your voice matters. And here's a fourth point. Call out the fact that you are being interrupted. Now, I know what you might be thinking. That sounds crazy. That sounds like I'm creating conflict. But here's the thing. Calling it out doesn't mean you're trying to start an argument. It means you're making the invisible visible. And here's what calling it out can actually sound like. If you're in a meeting and you notice a pattern where one person keeps cutting you off over and over, you address it directly. And you might say, I've noticed that when I'm speaking, I sometimes get cut off before I can finish my thoughts. I just want to make sure my points are landing. So I'd like to be able to complete my thoughts. That's it. No accusation, no drama, just a clean, direct statement of what you need. In fact, research from Stanford University found that women who named patterns of interruption in professional settings, rather than absorbing them silently, were rated as significantly more self-assured and leadership ready by their peers. So you see the key here. They weren't voted as less likable. They were viewed as more respected. So the act of naming it and calling it out signals that you have enough self-awareness to see the dynamic and you have enough confidence to address it. Both of those are leadership qualities. So this is where I also want to be a little bit more nuanced about your tone, because there's a difference between complaining and naming. Complaining sounds like, oh, You always cut me off, and it's really frustrating. Naming, on the other hand, sounds like, I want to flag something that I've noticed so we can communicate better. One makes someone defensive. The other is critical feedback, and it's grounded in certainty. In fact, I remember once working with somebody who was an associate at a large consulting firm. Her name was Alice, and she was definitely on the quieter side at work. And she noticed that there were two louder colleagues in her team meetings that always just dominated the conversation, basically not letting one chime in. One day, Alice decided to address this, so she mentioned this to her boss. And guess what happened? Her boss validated the situation. He said that he noticed it too, and he knew that he needed to do something about it. So within 2 weeks, her boss restructured how meetings ran. And basically, he created a more structured environment where people could speak in a more consistent basis. Now, what I love about this story is sometimes calling it out and addressing it is exactly the kind of acknowledgement someone like a boss needs to hear so that they can also make the necessary changes to create a more equal space for all people to be included. Which goes into my fifth point. Never take interruptions personally. As a woman and as someone who works with a lot of people who feel undervalued and underappreciated, I know we can sometimes be very hard on ourselves when someone keeps interrupting us. We may take it personally, where we start to go, wait, maybe my ideas don't matter. Maybe I shouldn't say anything at all. Maybe what I have to say isn't valuable, and that is why people are interrupting me. I want to speak directly to that because I think it's more common than people admit, this narrative that goes on in our head. Never undermine what you know and the value you bring to a meeting. This is what I tell my students at Columbia University all the time. If someone keeps talking over you, that's not your problem. That's their problem. But it is your job to try to change the situation so you don't continue feeling undervalued and overlooked. For a lot of my smart listeners and people who are watching this, you might even have this extra layer of thinking, well, but what if what I have to say isn't valuable? Here's the point. What's valuable is actually subjective, meaning you might not think what you have to say is really valuable because you know it, because people keep talking over you, making you feel that way. But I'm going to say using your voice in a meeting is actually half the battle of getting the visibility you deserve at work. So as long as you can remember that there are action steps you can take, which are the tips I shared in this lesson and in this video, you can use these tools to better position yourself going forward. Because the truth is, interruptions, they're going to happen. For some of us, it might happen more than others. And as frustrating as that is, being able to mentally separate yourself, call it out, address it, redirect it, that is how you can reclaim your voice and make sure people give you the respect you deserve. And it all starts with the way you approach your communications. So my question for you is this. What are you going to do the next time someone interrupts you? How can you better prepare for moments like this when they occur? Let me know in the comments below. I also built a powerful workbook called Confident Communication Mindset Workbook, where I break down a lot of these concepts in more detail. All you have to do is comment confident below, and I will send you the link to download this workbook immediately. I can't wait to see you in our next video, and be sure to subscribe and like this video so you don't miss a new episode once it drops. I'll see you soon.